You're listening to the Zach Gelb Show on Fox Sports 920 The Jersey.
Welcome back in. Time in the Princeton Orthopedic Associates Studios, 5:15. We continue to break down that tough Eagles loss yesterday in Baltimore. Carson Wentz leads the team on a drive under 2 minutes to play, gets the touchdown, then Doug Peterson goes for two, and it just doesn't work out. Ball was deflected at the line of scrimmage, and the Eagles, now losers of 7 of their last 8. Now joining us on the hotline, did a great job calling the game yesterday along with Kenny Albert, and that is Daryl Moose Johnston, who joins us right now on the Zach Gelb Show. Moose, appreciate a few minutes, and how are you?
I'm good. Glad to be with you.
Well, thank you for coming on, and I appreciate your time today. So both you and Kenny on the broadcast, when Carson Wentz and the Eagles were going for 2 points led by their head coach, Doug Peterson, thought it was the right call. I agree with you. I thought it was the right decision. Just tell me what your thinking was on that one.
Well, I think a team on the road in that situation late in the game during the course of a 5-8 season, let's try to send a message, down the rest of the way here in 2016. We saw Jack Del Rio do it earlier in New Orleans. I think it makes sense when you're a team on the road. I think if Philadelphia is, in the playoff hunt with a couple of games to go, that maybe you take more of the conservative route. You kick the PAT and take your chances in overtime. But I like the decision based on how the season has transpired and really kind of letting the team know that you're going to be an aggressive play caller as the coach. So I thought it was a good decision by Doug. Obviously not executed the way he wanted, but I did like the decision in going for it.
When we talk about the actual play call, because there's been some backlash today, they thought Ryan Matthews should have been on the field, and I understand that. But at the end of the day, and I'm not the biggest supporter of Doug Peterson, but I thought he called a pretty darn good game yesterday. Just how about the final play call on the 2-point conversion?
Well, really the whole drive. It was Byron Marshall as opposed to Ryan Matthews. When you get down into that situation and you've got the 2-point play, Ryan had scored on it earlier on just a straight run call. I like that play. You had Dorial Green-Beckham on the outside and a very big size mismatch, and you're thinking just kind of a jump ball scenario there, and they hand the ball off inside. So, I like that one, but you can't go back to that well. So you've got to come up with something different. But I agree with you. I thought Doug called a nice game. Obviously Jordan Hicks with the big interception, kind of turns that. It's about ready to get away from him. Down 10 with Baltimore driving again. So I just like the response of the whole team. It is a team, and it functions in 3 different parts with offense, defense, and special teams. So, I think there at the end of the game, all 3 of those phases worked well together and put them in a position to win the game. So you'll learn from it, and that's the good thing. It's always something you can go back on and reteach, and it'll be things that Doug and his staff will be able to do in the offseason. And that's really, I think Eagles fans right now, I think you have to be excited for 2017. I know that this year probably was an emotional roller coaster for you, not knowing what the expectations were and then starting out 3-0 and then getting to this point here where you are at the season. But they've played in close games. They just haven't found a way to finish them. That's been the big thing. 0-6 in one-possession games. That'll obviously be something that they need to work on. But these are growing pains that all teams go through. So, I'm interested to see what they do next year. Carson Wentz with all the experience he's gotten this year, it'll be fun to watch the strides that he makes next season.
You know what it's like to go through one of these rebuilding processes when you, to say the least, when you get a few pieces in the draft and then you lose 2 seasons, then end up becoming a very consistent winner in this league. Take me back to that 89 season when you went 1-15, because the Eagles, they've lost 7 of their last 8. As a player, you're not thinking long-term. You're thinking, all right, we got to win these games now. So how do you keep your confidence up during a tough stretch like that?
Yeah, it's hard. It really does become week to week, and you hear it a lot, and I think a lot of fans, kind of think it becomes, just coach speak or cliche, but it really is. Even when you're going through a tough season, and our 1-15 season, we were just trying to get, something positive going from week to week. The only thing that saved us is I think our 1 win came in week 8, so at least we split it up and didn't go on a 10-game losing streak or a 12-game losing streak. But those are really, really difficult times, and I've said this before. We had San Francisco and Chicago a couple of weeks ago, and it was 1-10 versus 2-9. And I think the point that you try to get across is number one, it's hard to win an NFL football game, every week. I mean, the parity in the league is so close, and it's really come down to a handful of plays that kind of flip these games. I mean, Baltimore, look at them. They're 6-3 now in one-possession games. They play that style, and they found a way to win them. And that's the big thing when you're a team in transition or a team that's just starting out with a new head coach. You forget how to win. You forget how to win these games, and people are like, "What do you mean you forget how to win a game?" You're just not making those plays, those 3 to 5 critical plays during the course of the game that flip it in your favor. You're not making them, and we saw opportunities for the Philadelphia Eagles to make those plays yesterday, and they didn't. And it had a little bit of help from Baltimore. I mean, the interceptions by Joe Flacco at the end of that game is a bad decision. It was one of the things that he was very regretful about after the game. But you're just not able to get over that hump. Nelson Aguilar on the 4th down. There's a critical play that you got to make. There's going to be a few of those during the course of the game, and when you're in the midst of one of these challenging seasons, it seems like every play that fits into that category goes against you or goes in favor of the other team.
I think a lot of the criticism so far of Doug Peterson has been fair. Yesterday, it may have went a little bit too far. When people walk away yesterday, like we were talking about, criticizing the coach, I think they're not correct in that assessment. But if you look at some of the decisions in the Giant game this year and the Cowboys game, you definitely have an argument. When you're going through one of these stretches and on the outside, everyone's doubting the coach, the players in the locker room doubt the coach, or does that not really happen too much?
No, it was never a part of our group in 1989. That it's going to be a building process. It's going to be a bumpy road. It's going to come with plenty of challenges. As long as the message stays consistent, and that's probably one of the things that Doug shared with us that we probably should have gotten out in the game. We're the same way as broadcasters. We finished the game and wow, we left a lot of good stuff, on the floor. We had, some good information that we should have shared. We had some good graphics that we should have put in. The game kind of starts and you get caught in the flow and the rhythm and you forget about certain things. And Doug told us when we talked to him, about being with Andy and, what were some of the big things that Andy, that he told you about becoming a head coach. And the biggest thing was to be consistent, to have a consistent message, to be consistent with your players, establishing that consistency. So that's going to be one of the big things for Doug as he moves forward is just being consistent with the message, being consistent with what he does. And sometimes it becomes frustrating for the media. That's kind of the pipeline to the fan base. And, I know that the Dallas media gets frustrated with Jason Garrett when he talks about the process all the time. Unfortunately, one of the things that players and head coaches have to do when they're in the middle of a press conference is not say things that can be divisive for the team. So you are going to get a little coach speak. You are going to get some cliches here and there. But if you kind of sort through it, you can kind of find, the honest assessment of where the team is, the honest assessment of what they think they're going to do. I think that Doug has done a nice job. I think that the best thing that's happened in this year for Philly fans, there's one key position for every football team in the National Football League, and that's quarterback. And it sure sounds like, and it sure feels like everybody in the Eagles organization knows that they have that guy. Now they just got to start adding the pieces around him, like you said. This year in free agency, this year in the draft. Let's go back and take a look at the areas that you struggled in. Make sure you solidify those and get some pieces in that puzzle to help Carson Wentz out.
And the next 2 drafts specifically are very big because you don't want to be a Ryan Grigson situation. I know the Colts are competing for a playoff spot, but they haven't done a good job in protecting their quarterback in the draft and also in free agency. The next piece in that puzzle and who's ultimately going to determine if the Eagles have success or not and bringing in the talent is Howie Roseman. Where's your confidence in Howie Roseman, Moose Johnson?
I don't know Howie very well at all. The general manager, the guy that's building the teams is somebody that we really don't have the opportunity to meet with and visit with. Just for me, if I'm looking at where Philadelphia is at right now, my big emphasis is going to be on the offensive line. One of the things that happened in Dallas, and Jason Garrett shared us with this years ago when we were doing the Cowboys when they were in the middle of one of their tough stretches, was he saw the age of the offensive line. He recognized that it would just be a matter of time before they started to retire or their playing level would drop as they got older. And they were just about to transition into upgrading their offensive line. Well, because of what happened, they lost 4 of their 5 starters within a 3.5-month period. So now you're playing, against teams in the NFL with backup guys and guys from the practice squad, and your offensive line is the key to your success offensively. So, they made that commitment to go out and get Tyron Smith, to get Travis Frederick, to get Zach Martin. I think that you look at the Washington Redskins also in the NFC East, they've really kind of focused on their offensive line. I think it's an overlooked, group. I think we get infatuated with the skill players and the fantasy-driven fans. The offensive line is the most important thing. So for Howie Roseman this year, I'd definitely be looking, to upgrade my offensive line. I'd want to have somebody in place for Jason Peters when he decides to retire. I think you have to get inside. I know they went out and got Brandon Brooks, but I'd re-solidify somewhere in the guard center guard area as well. That great offensive line is why Dak Prescott has been able to do the things that he's been able to do. He's working around a group that Carson Wentz doesn't have. There's been a lot of instability in that offensive line. They don't have the big running back behind them. They don't have a future Hall of Famer at tight end. They've been productive at the tight end. Obviously, the wide receiver position, what Dak is able to work with here in Dallas is much different than what Carson Wentz is working with in Philadelphia. So you can see the importance of those pieces in place for a young quarterback. But for Dallas, it all starts with the offensive line, and if I was rebuilding Philadelphia, that's where my focus would be next year in the draft and free agency.
We're talking to Moose, and it's tough to evaluate a quarterback when you don't have a lot of talent, and you've had an offensive line decimated with injuries, and they're not playing Paul Turner and going with Nelson Aguilar, and he continues to be an embarrassment for this football team. When you take a look at the quarterback, though, and you've been analyzing football for a very long time and played the game for a very long time, what do you think are some good things Carson Wentz does, and then what are some things you think he needs to improve on, Moose?
Well, I think the big thing is recognizing when the play is breaking down and understanding how important every possession is. During the course of the game, we had Carson when he had the fumble on the sideline that fortunately went out of bounds, but he's got it in one hand and he's holding it low. And the guys in the NFL, they don't come in for tackles and they don't come in for sacks. When you play against Terrell Suggs and Ellis Dumervil and DeMarcus Ware and some of these elite pass rushers, when they're coming around the corner, they're looking for the football. The sack is secondary. Creating the turnover is primary. So the big thing for Carson is just understanding when that play's starting to break down and make sure that you have that football secure. And then we saw Joe Flacco do it as he climbed in the pocket and everything started to break down, got two hands on it. The second time, he wasn't able to hold on to it. Nigel Bradham did a really nice job and had contact on the football coming on the inside. So I think the big thing is understanding how important every possession is, how valuable each play is. And it's probably something new for a quarterback coming from the level of collegiate football that Carson played and how much of a difference it is at the NFL level. But the big thing with him is just the intangibles, the things that you can't teach. He already has a ton of them, and that's great stuff. And that's, if there's a mechanics thing that you want to work on, if there's, a foundation, a platform, all these phrases that we hear from people when they talk about, fixing the quarterback. If that's something you want to dabble in, go ahead. But to me, the big thing is you can't teach, the ability to win over a locker room as a young quarterback. You can't teach the toughness. You can't teach a lot of the things that Carson Wentz has. So I think his upside is tremendous, and that Philadelphia should be very excited at what the future holds.
Moving to the defense, this has been a unit where effort has been talked about. In the last 2 weeks, they've showed up after the debacle in Cincinnati. But still, one player that effort's really still in a question is Rodney McLeod. And yesterday, he was standing there for about 7 yards on what ended up being a touchdown drive. As a player, when that continues to be an habitual issue, and even Rodney McLeod after the game said, hey, I could be more aggressive. Do players in the locker room, do they go out to him and say, hey, you got to pick up the level of player? Or do they not do that?
Yeah, I'm sure he's probably going to hear a little bit from Jim Schwartz. I'm sure he's probably going to hear a little bit from Malcolm Jenkins, some of the older guys on the team. And they'll do it in a positive way. It won't be critical. It won't be derogatory, but they'll do it in a positive way. And you do have to have that. You want to have that mentality as a defense. It's part of what goes along with what Jim Schwartz has had with his other defenses. So, whether it's, his time in Baltimore, his time in Tennessee, his time in Detroit, there was that physical kind of bully style, kind of before Seattle kind of started to gravitate towards that bully style of defense. So it's always had that physical element to it. And, you see the teams that have those safeties, and boy, I played against a bunch of them, back when I was playing, Steve Atwater and Dennis Smith in Denver. Probably one of the toughest combinations. Obviously, Ronnie Lott, Chuck Cecil in Green Bay. It was just, you had guys that you were looking for them pre-snap. You wanted to know where they were pre-snap, because you knew a big hit was coming if the play was designated for you to go into their area. So, that's the mentality you want to have from that safety position. You want the tight end, you want that slot receiver, you want that running back to be concerned that when you get into his area of the field, that you're going to pay a price. And Rodney McLeod, in that situation, it was a nice play call, it was a nice play design, and it was set up, and it was one-on-one. And Rodney McLeod had the inside out. He had an opportunity to really make a big stop there on Kenneth Dixon, and he didn't do it. So, he's going to have to explain some things and just grow from that experience and be a little bit more physical when that opportunity presents itself in the future.
Moose, two more before we let you run, as we're joined by the great Daryl Moose Johnston on the Zach Gelb Show, Fox Sports 920 The Jersey. Since you played with Michael Irvin, I met the playmaker once, and the only time I met him, it was at the Super Bowl. And I'll never forget this. He was about to do a TV interview on Radio Row, and I just happened to be doing my show right next to him, and he turned around and he goes, "How does my hair look?" And I go, "Oh, it looks fine." And he goes, "Oh, wait, let me ask someone else. You're white. You can't tell me how my hair looks." Just what was it like playing with Michael Irvin? Because the one time I met him, he was such a character. I was laughing my ass off the entire time.
Yeah, that's vintage Michael Irvin right there. The funny thing is I think people on the outside have a perception of him because of some of the negative things that happened to Michael throughout his career. But what I tell everybody is there wasn't a harder worker on those championship teams than Michael Irvin. And he was the emotional heartbeat of our team. You need leadership at every level. Obviously, you need the lead by example guys. You need the vocal leader. Obviously on our offense, the buck stopped with Troy Aikman. He was the undisputed leader of our offense. But Michael was the emotional heartbeat. And when Michael wasn't in the lineup, we just did not play as good as we did when he was in the lineup. And he brought that energy to the team. So, he's just one of those guys that's very unique. It was amazing to watch him compete. He was fueled by the thought process in his head that he was not as good as the other wide receivers in his era. He was not as good as Jerry Rice. He was not as good as Herman Moore. He was not as good as Sterling Sharp. He was going to outwork them, and that was the way he approached every single day. And I remember Jason Garrett telling a story one time. He was out running routes in shoulder pads and helmets in April. And, Jason came out and he said, "What are you doing?" And he goes, I'm running the route tree, working on my brakes. And he goes, "But you got shoulder pads and helmets on, and it's April." He goes, "Well, I don't play in shorts and a T-shirt. I play in shoulder pads and helmets. So there's no sense in practicing something that I'm not actually going to do." And Jason was so impressed that Jason started coming out with him and throwing the football to him, so he was not just running the routes, but actually finishing the play with the catches. So he was always looking for that edge. And obviously one of the key reasons that we had as much success as we did in the early 90s.
And before we let you run, as that's a great story, as we're talking to Moose Johnston, you look at the best two teams right now in the National Football League, your Cowboys and the New England Patriots. We've seen the Giants beat the Cowboys twice. The Raiders have been a nice story in the AFC. Who are the teams that you think have the best chance to dethrone Dallas and New England, as they'll most likely be the one seeds heading into the playoffs?
Well, for Dallas, you got to look at somebody. Obviously, the Giants have found a way to defend Dak Prescott and to frustrate him. Was the weather, and a lot of people talked about the weather, up in New York a couple of weeks ago, and Dak really not having played in inclement weather like that, the slipperiness of the ball. We'll have to wait and see. I think the NFC is a little bit more open than the AFC. I just think that what New England does year in and year out, and the difference that Tom Brady makes at quarterback is going to be something that's going to be very, very difficult to overcome. But Dallas sitting at 12-2, but also, if you go back, you see the third quarter, the way they played last night, they allowed Tampa Bay to get back into that game, and I actually gave up the lead in the second half. You go back to the Giant game where they lost on the road. You go back to Minnesota. If they don't have the fumbled punt, that's going to be a nail-biter. The Washington game on Thanksgiving, giving up 500 yards, over 400 yards passing to Kirk Cousins. So the last month, there's been some things that Dallas has had to navigate. The great thing about what they're doing right now is they're finding a way to win that game in the end, except for the Giants game. So, that's the positive. But, they've got to get some of these other things corrected. Seattle is still dangerous. Not as dangerous without Earl Thomas on the back end, but I think that Seattle is still dangerous. Green Bay seems to be peaking at the right time right now. They're playing much better. Atlanta, the way that they can create matchup problems for you offensively, not just with the wide receiver group, but with that running back group. I think that the running back group for Atlanta is one of the more underrated parts of the offense that nobody's really talking about around the league right now. We had them earlier in the year against San Diego, and just one of the guys was in there. If you've got both of those guys healthy, boy, that's Tevin Coleman and Dante Freeman are pretty tough to take care of. So I think the NFC is going to be interesting in the playoffs. The one team in the AFC, obviously Kansas City, they've had some great wins, but they've also had some kind of mysterious losses. The Tampa Bay loss looks a little bit more respectable now, the way Tampa Bay played down the stretch. And people should keep an eye on Tennessee. We had Tennessee against Green Bay a couple weeks ago. They were up 21-0, so that's a legitimate team, and they've got some quality wins this year. So I wouldn't just look at their record or what division they're coming out of. Tennessee could be a team that gets into the playoffs and makes a little bit of noise.
Moose, appreciate the time. Thanks so much. This was great. Let's do it again real soon.
You got it, Zach. Take care.
Thanks so much. There's Daryl Johnston joining us on the Zach Gelb Show.